All right. Looks like we are live on the Facebooks and whatnot. And we'll start letting people in. Great. Okay. Welcome, piano friends and neighbors. Great to have you here once again at Piano Tech Radio Hour. Today's session, I think we're going to open it up a little bit more to for some audience participation and some discussion. So make sure you got your thinking cap on and feel free to participate in the conversation. I will tell you what the topic is soon. And that having been said, we'll leave it open. I think today can have a kind of a fun place where we can let the conversation go where it tends to. I don't want to be too prescriptive about it. But as people enter here, I'll give a little intro to where we're at, and meaning what you are attending or watching if you're on the Facebook or YouTube right now. And then we'll talk about what we're going to talk about, and then we'll start talking about it. So I'd like to welcome you to Piano Tech Radio Hour. We gather here every Saturday to meet with and learn from the most fascinating and knowledgeable folks in the piano world. This can include piano manufacturers, rebuilders, musicians, maybe even makers of other instruments, etc., and of course, piano techs. Our mutual goal is to become better at a craft, helping each other and creating a ever more musical world together. Now, Piano Tech Radio Hour is brought to you by Piano Technicians Master Classes, an online learning resource that brings you cutting-edge instruction from piano industry masters without leaving your home. You can find out more at pianotechniciansmasterclass.com. And for today's episode, we maybe continue a bit of a theme that we've been talking about for a couple weeks, and that's a bit about piano brands. Now, we talked about with Larry, we talked specifically about the Steinway brand and specifically a couple of sort of origins of pianos, right? How they have Hamburg Steinways and New York Steinways, and we talked about comparing and contrasting them. Oh, and by the way, this reminds me, Sally Phillips, who we've had on the program before, a great Steinway-focused piano technician, did send me a link to an article that she wrote, doing the very thing that we had been doing, comparing the Steinway, Hamburg and New York style pianos. So I'll make sure and dig that up and get that to you guys during this session. And so you can take a look at that. That should be kind of interesting. I'll introduce my co-host here, Morgan Cowell, the lovely and talented. Morgan Cowell is here with us this week, coming from us from the good old Midwest, Nebraska, and where he runs his own piano business, doing various wonderful things, such as going out and everything from going out and tuning the pianos to managing a team in a workshop, selling pianos. He's an NBSS graduate. Privileged to have him on board with us. So again, let me sort of launch into the conversation here. I'm going to share some sort of resources to kind of wet our whistles in this conversation about piano brands. But before I'm going to kind of bring up a list of piano brands to kind of gloss over, right? Because sometimes it's easy to forget some of the ones we don't see as often. But I'd love for everybody here to kind of think about your relationship with piano brands. Are there brands that you think are just amazing, almost, no matter what, kind of hands down, I love this brand of piano? Do you find that you have a preference for a brand that other people haven't had a preference over? Do you think about it differently than that? Are you more kind of focused on specific pianos? Like any brand of piano, may have a good reputation, but it really just comes down to that specific model of piano, not even model, right? That actual specific instance of a piano, right? Because there's always going to be irregularities in manufacturing. And of course, the more custom built the pianos, perhaps you get some advantages to that. Perhaps you get more variability though. So you want to, choose the specific piano within a model, and you find that interesting. So you think on that. I'd love for people to share what brands stand out to them. Do you have a favorite, for example? Are you particularly impressed with the brand? Do you have, and this is probably a little bit easier, I don't know, a least favorite? Are there brands that you kind of, you hear the name and you cringe and you go, oh, I see, like, I don't know that I want to visit that piano, or I'm going to have to give that a special type of once over because of the nature of its quality or something like that. But I think the first thing I'll do is kind of share this web page, which I think would be useful to us as a reference point. So of course, Piano Buyer is, a wonderful resource for everything on pianos and sort of buying of pianos. They've moved into digital pianos, all sorts of different things. And by the way, that's where this article by Sally Phillips is, which I'll share soon. Let's take a look at the website and just kind of look at the brands that they have listed there and see which ones jump out at you as a part of the conversation. And then I'll bring in Morgan too, to get some opening comments from him, and then we'll dive in. So let me start though by sharing my screen, and let's take a look at what we got here. I'll just kind of read through them. So I'm sure there's more brands than what they have listed here, but I'm pretty confident that they put quite a bit of thought into which ones that they've included. So this is just pianobuyer.com/brand-profiles, and they've got a handful of brands that are listed in alphabetical order here. But it's not like every brand that's ever been made. So we've got everything from Baldwin, Bechstein, Bluthner, Bosendorfer, Boston, Brodmann, Chernobyf. There's one that I've never heard of. I don't know if you have. Love to hear your opinions or thoughts on that. Klein, Cristofori, Cunningham, Emerson, Essex, Estonia, Fandrick and Sons, Fazioli, August Forrester, Geyer, Grotrian, Heisler, Hailoon, Hallett Davis, Hardman and Peck, Hoffman, Hupfield, Ermler. I haven't dealt with Ermlers. Kawai, Kaiserberg, Kingsburg, Kanabe, Kohler and Campbell, Kraus, Berlin, Ernst, Mason and Hamlin, Neindorf, Palatino, Parsons Music, Pearl River, Perzina. I've heard that name quite a bit as of late, although I don't know whether that's positive or not. Petrov, Promberger, Ravenscroft, Rittmuller, Renish, Samick, Sauter, Schimmel, Schultz, Geber, Schultz, Pullman, Schumann, Seiler, Steinberg, G, Steinberg, Wilhelm, I believe, Steingraber and Son, Steinway and Son, Story and Clark. I'm probably butchering some of these. I apologize. Walter, Charles, Weber, Wendell and Lung, Yamaha, Youngchang, Zimmerman. So now it's like, I'll put the link to this in the chat if you want to use it to refresh your memory, but I'll stop the screen share. I'll put that link in the chat. We'll get to any comments that are over there in the comment section. But yeah, Morgan, anything to say up front here on your experiences with piano brands and thoughts about sort of the conversation around that?
It's always interesting for me to talk with some of the veterans that have been around longer, because they will tell me stories about brands that I didn't even know happened. Like, for example, I didn't know that Bösendorfer used to be owned by Kimball back, I think it was in the 80s, for a while. So now they're owned by Yamaha, and there's a lot more like that. But I think that it's important for us to understand at least the major players within the market. Who makes them? Who owns them? What country are they being manufactured in? And a lot of these brands now are actually being owned by just a handful of conglomerates, like how Disney kind of owns, their whole other spectrum of things. But that website that you pulled up, the Piano Buyer, that is a wonderful resource to start from. I'll also send a lot of my clients there as well, just for kind of recommendations on service and rebuilding and whatnot. I also sent you a link, Ethan, with that same page, but just the ranking of the pianos. that's an interesting one to see. Uh, Um, but there's some comments here in the chat about the Furic pianos.
Yeah, we could
Um,
maybe bring that. Do you think that's worth bringing up to share as well? That link? Like, yeah, share the screen on that one? Or
well, that
more
I
just as
sent
a
you. Yeah,
reference?
yeah. Well, then I
Okay.
sent you. Yes. Yeah, that'd
Yeah.
be interesting.
Let's bring that up. Let's take a look at it. Let me get a screen share going here. Piano ranking. And then we can probably do a bit of a zoom in here because oh, that's not working. Let's see here. View. Zoom's not working super well. There we go. That does something, right? Okay. So performance grade pianos. Tell me, did you have something to say, Morgan? Thoughts on this?
Not necessarily. He does have like some kind of just like precursors for this list, but this is essentially his ranking of the new pianos as far as their just performance. So it's interesting to put the Hamburg in a whole other category than the New York. But I'd be curious for other people here, is the iconic list correct? Are there some that should be on there? Are you surprised that others aren't?
Yeah, iconic too. I didn't look into the description here, but iconic's an interesting word to choose, right? Because it means more than just quality, right? It does mean that there's some sort of brand, almost like a brand recognition or like a brand clout, even beyond a recognition. Yeah, so without going into too much detail on why they came up with that word and how they define it, certainly I've always remembered Bechstein and Bosendorfer, and maybe it just happens to be the piano dealerships, I came up around as sort of being, I think Bluthner as well, but maybe it's the bees, maybe there's something special about bees. But I do remember, like, I used to work at this piano store called East Coast Piano in New Jersey, near where I went to school at Rutgers, and they had all the pianos on the showroom floor. They had Hallett Davis. I always remember that was kind of like the profitable one, right? Like it was the sort of brand that they would direct people towards, but then it didn't always, seem like it was the better quality necessarily. It was sort of the more profitable piano, but they were always trying to make the case that it was like equivalent to a Yamaha or something like that, right? But beyond that, there was, a Bosendorfer on a little stage in the corner, for example, right? And it's like, oh, like here's the Bosendorfer that you can't afford, or if you come here, you can expect to pay top dollar because this is basically the best instrument we have here, and this is the brand that kind of is held above others. I know Bosendorfer particularly. I have at least one friend, maybe one or two, with the Imperial Grand, the Bosendorfer Imperial Grand, and it's kind of got this air of nobility about it, and the extra keys and stuff like that. So those are some thoughts on those B pianos. I don't know why I'm putting in the same category if it's necessary. Steingraber and Sohn, interestingly enough, I didn't start hearing about it as much until I was doing the radio hour and doing piano technicians master classes, and David Anderson had quite a bit of experience with the brand and really liked it. And we had people from the company come and talk about it, and my awareness of it became quite high. And so I wouldn't have necessarily put it on that list of iconic, 5 or 10 years ago. But now it makes more sense to me as I've grown more aware of that brand. And what about you, Morgan? You asked the audience, but anything from you in terms of on or off the list of the iconics?
Well, so I would scroll down a little bit so we can get the distinguished in there. So that's where we get to see more of the instruments that I see on a daily basis. We all see Yamahas for sure, but see Yamaha there is in the CF. So the CF line, not the SX, which is what you see in the notable. I don't see that many of the German pianos, at least the new ones. I see enough of the old ones, but I think this list is mostly based on the new inventory that's coming out right now.
Mm-hmm.
I I agree with what Larry said in the chat, and that Mason Hamlin should be a little bit higher. I think that they're neck and neck with New York Steinways in a lot of cases. The classic line now that they have made by Pearl River, by Pearl River, obviously wouldn't be up there. But and then, is there any other stuff in the chat here?
Yeah, let me read through the chat now. I think it's time to get to this. So Larry said off the bat, my hands-down favorite piano brand is almost completely unknown in the US. Furick or Feurig, depending on how you'd like to pronounce it. Maybe there's even a better pronunciation. He said he's owned several. He has one now and said no other brand comes close. And this list is only of currently made pianos. Yes, that makes sense. There's quite a few that have been made in the past. And that makes me think of a comment I'll make too, just about this general topic. Joe Burrows asked, when were the Furick pianos made? They've been made continuously, said Larry, since 1851, but the company has gone through several different owners. And let's see, I'll make a couple comments there. At one point, I was working on appraising, I believe it was, what was it? Was it an Estonia piano? And that was sort of an interesting part of making the appraisal, was the history of like who owned the company, right? And or like what was even going on politically, right? Was this like before or after the Iron Curtain, and how many years and stuff like that. And it's so interesting. We as humans, I think we like to have a very consistent, solid picture of something like a brand. We always want to think about it in the same way, but these things change hands, they get traded around, and when the brand is just the brand, the people who are managing the company really decide how things go. I mean, they're given something to work with, they have a certain momentum. It makes me think of like the Harvard brand or like the Yale brand, right? There's a certain quality that is associated, but at the same time, there's always a competition there to be the best. And they're not granted that high level, they always have to earn it, right? So let's get to a few more comments and then get back to the discussion here. So Larry, he mentioned the years. So Joe said he's looking at the Feurig website, and Larry, as you said, Mason Hamlin belongs at the top of the list. Yeah, they've been a very good piano throughout the years and still are. And I don't know, are they still? They're still affiliated with? Is it Piano? They're affiliated. The same brand owns. Like the carbon fiber action and the piano, one of the player systems as well. I'm blanking on like the names of
Piano Disc and
right.
Wessel Nickel and Gross. Yeah,
and Wessel Nickel and Gross. Yeah,
that's the same family. Yep, that's all tied in with Mason and Hamlin.
Right, and that's interesting too, because there's some of these larger brands. Parsons was interesting that it came up on that list of piano brands. I'm not familiar with an actual Parsons piano, but I'm familiar with like the big conglomerate music group of Parsons, which is owning quite a bit of things, especially in China. And that's different. That's a lot different than this sort of Mason and Hamlin kind of small collection of brands that are sort of loosely related, right? Like it's not just a bunch of piano brands. It's kind of different products, right, that are associated with pianos. It's an interesting take on things.
Would you scroll down a little? Oh, sorry. Would you go back to that
I'll reshare. Yeah, for sure. No problem.
There's just one last thing towards the bottom, which would be a bit more akin to what we do with every day. There you go. The consumer grade. This is one that I'll actually send like to my clients that are looking, because this kind of puts it into an interesting chart, because then it tells you which country it's made in, and where that goes on the rank. Tai Luen, for example, is interesting. I think the over 6 foot grands are in the premium, or sorry, in the professional. Yeah. Whereas the other ones are one step lower. It's an interesting thing to note.
Yeah, and this interesting. Yeah, the professional list too has some of those piano brands that aren't necessarily the ones that are in the iconic, right?
Mm-hmm.
So like iconic does not necessarily mean professional grade. And it's actually interesting for me to see names. I guess it makes sense. Like this says Hupfeld in Europe. I'm completely unfamiliar with the Hupfeld brand. I've never seen one, so I wouldn't know, what the quality is. But looking at this list, or Kaiserberg too, I've never encountered a Kaiserberg piano. But considering what else it's on the list with, I would guess it's a pretty good piano, at least at the professional grade. Charles Walter was one that I had previously not had great associations with the brand of piano, but had dealt primarily with sort of like the sort of consumer level of that particular brand. Let's see about some more comments here. Love the discussion.
Yeah, the one from Dan really is interesting. He's talking about the dealer maintenance, the dealer prep, and how that can make a huge difference in the piano. And I agree entirely. There's a dealer up near me that will unbox a Yamaha, and it's practically in tune. It's pretty much ready to go out of the box. And they'll do the same with the Steinway B, and it's not nearly as ready to go. And it really hurts the store because they don't do the dealer prep. But it's fascinating what a couple hours will do when they're new like that.
Yeah. That's an interesting facet of all of this. And it's something that I think these brands could potentially be a little bit or a lot more cognizant of, right? Putting all the time into trying to design an excellent piano and then just sort of handing it off to the dealer. And, it's kind of like a great example was a piano that I worked on several years ago. I'm trying to think of what brand it was. I think it was, I'll think of the brand. It was a nice piano. It was like a concert level piano, and it was an expensive piano. This piano probably cost $70,000, and I was playing it as the technician, and the keyboard felt horrible. It was relatively, like, the weight of it was, I guess, relatively it felt like when an electronic keyboard tries to make a weighted keys, and it had a associated like little squeak to it. Like there was like almost like a little winchy kind of squeaking sound or feel that had when you played the keys, and it literally made it feel like a cheap electronic piano with an attempt at a weighted keyboard. And it made me, even as a professional technician, think that this was not a good piano. Like, just the whole piano must not be great, until I went and opened it up and tried to address the issue. And there was some kind of lubrication that needed to be done and some easing of the keys. I had never encountered that particular issue before. And sure enough, like once I did that kind of adaptation to the keyboard, it actually felt like the value of the piano that probably was. But to imagine somebody paying that much money for a piano and then having it arrive and having it play like that and feeling like they have to accept that, or that's just how their piano is, that's almost mortifying,
Yeah, I absolutely agree. I wonder if that happens more with owners that don't play the piano, right? On the dealership, perhaps, right? But they don't necessarily play the piano, or
Mhm.
they don't go for the artistry, and it's more kind of a sale thing. Or I wonder too, like if it's the economics of it. Um, I know that some people have a hard time just selling pianos in general, so maybe the budget's not there to have a technician go through it for 2 days. That's still no excuse in my book, but I'd
Yeah.
be curious to hear some of the comments from those that are watching in different
Yeah.
markets too, because I'm in the Midwest, right? Like it's a lot cheaper out here to have a retail environment. But if you're out in California, that's a whole different thing. What you have for square footage, and what you're paying for advertising and all that.
Yeah. I think when in general, having talked to a lot of piano technicians and having talked to the higher end piano technicians who carry a lot of respect of other technicians and musicians and dealers and so forth, um, and by the way, dealers themselves, when I kind of think about the opinions that they have and the patterns of the successful ones or not, even the successful dealers will say, I want to prepare the piano like so that it plays well. I do. I'm not saving. I'm not cutting costs, um, and putting like not well performing pianos out there and not prepping them. But I do agree with you, Morgan. I think that is the obstacle for a piano dealer to go. But how do I make it work financially? To just let my technician sit there and do what he likes to make it sound good, right? How long is that going to take? And how many dollars is that going to go out the door? And like you said, what if somebody just buys it as a piece of furniture? Was that wasted money? Or maybe it wasn't. I don't know. Like, it's interesting to think about the rationalizations for, because even if somebody does buy it as a piece of furniture, when somebody else comes to their house that knows what's going on with the piano, sits down and plays it, and they go, what did you buy? And and how much did you pay for it? And they go, oh wow, this person knows what they're talking about. I feel like I got screwed. Like that doesn't, even though they didn't know for maybe a few months, it doesn't reflect well back on the institution that sold the piano. All
So
right,
do you
there's
think
yeah,
there
go ahead.
should be more regulation from manufacturers themselves, right? Like if Fazioli, like if you have a dealership with Fazioli, like should that be serviced in a particular way, X amount of times per year? Um like you think that's the answer?
I'm not in the thick of it as much as a lot of folks here in terms of unpacking pianos and dealing with them. I have heard from some folks, uh, maybe I heard something from you, I don't know, but an idea that there are certain pianos. Well, I mean, you just said it. There are certain pianos that come and they're pretty good, and I guess it's like some manufacturers take their hands off. They say that's not my part to set up the piano, right? Because it's going to ship and things are going to shift, and it's not my place before it, when it leaves the factory. We'll put it in a certain condition, but sort of rely on the technicians on the ground after delivery when they can really fine tune it to actually take care of that. And so I think that there's a couple points in the process that this can be addressed. One is perhaps actually more intentionality into setting up the piano when it leaves the factory, and not leaving that the dealers, because number one, they might not be doing it anyway, so you might as well get it taken care of. There's another point in the process of putting training out there for the dealers and the technicians that work for the dealers to say, you've gotten our piano, here's how you set it up. There's IKEA, maybe it's you know it's the IKEA booklet with the guy with his hands in the air and the phone call if you need it, but like but like something, right? Some instructions. Okay, so you got this piano, here's how we want you to tweak it once it gets here, or like an instructional video or something, or certifications that people can get for your particular brand to actually get it set up. That those seem to be like great ideas.
I do find that strange that we don't have that like readily available from the manufacturers. Right? Like you take a car to the dealership, like they have a book with all the parts, and here's this, and here's how to order this, and here's what screwdriver to use and how to access it. And sure, we don't have that kind of volume, which would warrant, that level of specificity, but still like the general overview for the maintenance of the piano, like for the technician from the dealer, I think that'd be a very, very interesting thing to have. Like tightening screws, are there hidden plate screws? Um, Adjusting the action, things with the pedals, or even just like the basic regulation specs. I mean, that's even kind of hard to find right now for even new instruments. So
Yeah,
maybe we
and
should work on that.
you know what? I think so. There was an era where there were all, it was a piano boom, right? And so there's lots of pianos, lots of buying pianos, on all sorts of ends of the spectrum. But my sense is there was more of that approach at one time when the piano industry was so much broader, so that you could have like a spec sheet for this particular piano brand. Maybe it's not every piano brand, but like the higher end brands would say, hey, here's like a parts booklet or whatever, where nowadays sometimes they can't even maintain that type of thing. But we may be entering a new era, especially at the high end, where that's feasible again, especially because of the possibilities that digitization just brings, right? So I'm just thinking, right, QR codes, right? You don't need to even include a manual with the piano. You don't need to, like, specs for a piano. You could have a little QR code that's under the inside the piano somewhere, like on an upright piano inside the lid or something like that. Little QR code, scan here, you get all the specs and various things that a piano technician might need. And that's not difficult. You don't have to print anything. It's not bad. You could even have instructional videos. So I think we might be entering an era where that's feasible again now, to have a little bit more specificity. And that is because everyone I talk to in the piano industry says things are going towards the high end, right? If you're going to be, if you're going to make some money, if you're going to have a reputation, if you're going to have success in pianos moving forward, you're probably not going to be the guy who just can play a piano and walks into the house and plays it and says, I tuned your piano, right? Like, you're going to be the guy that you probably can actually play quite well, in addition to tuning by ear and voicing and, doing various types of repairs and maintenance, that regulation that are necessary. So yeah, here we go. We're headed there. Let's look at the comments. A lot of stuff coming in here. So I'm going to go back a little bit because I haven't been able to pay attention. So you guys might have been reading it, but so there's a little bit of back and forth here between Larry and Joe, which is great. And they're talking about Furick pianos. And Joe was asking if he had knowledge about which years they produced their best pianos. And Larry said they've always been high quality, but the ones he owned and considered the best were from 1910 to 1920, which is interesting. That's not necessarily the most recent. And then, of course, I accidentally scanned down too far. Now we went to Mason and Hamlin. They're still being built in Massachusetts, which is great. Carl said this week he worked on a Shigeru, Bosendorfer, Imperial, Fazioli too. Now he's just kind of making us all jealous, I think, Carl. I worked on a Shigeru, Bosendorfer, Imperial, Fazioli 278, both New York and Hamburg Steinway. And next week we'll work on 2 concerts with the new Yamaha CX2. Grateful. Yeah. Grateful and boastful, maybe. I don't know.
Hey, this is the group to do it.
This is the group to do it. Joe asked if Larry had any knowledge about which, oh no, we talked through that already. And Dan said, not knocking quality, but you've seen good and bad from all makers. Yeah, and I agree. I think that's a very interesting facet that often gets overlooked, is there's varying quality within all brands. And Larry and Joe are going back and forth about Furick still, and maybe we can talk a little bit more about it in a future session. Joe just picked up a 6-foot 1908 Weber for free in not too bad condition that he will restore. That sounds kind of fun. Give us updates on that, Joe. And question from Joe for the high-end technicians out there: how many hours does it take to bring a brand new New York Model L, O, or B Steinway to professional level performance? So basically, we're talking about setup here. Great question. Alan Etter says that would be measured in days, not hours. Okay, so we're talking, and I guess we're talking work days, right? So like 8 hours, 16 hours, up to, I don't know, a work day, maybe 3 work days could be 24 total hours. But I think it's might be different for different people. Judy said she works in a store, some purchase on looks only. She thinks most manufacturers assume that stores will prep pianos. And I think that's probably a poor assumption on the parts of those manufacturers. Dan said he's at a Steinway dealer 1 or 2 days, but they focus on custom prep when it gets to its home. Some manufacturers could do better putting them together. Yes. New Steinways have been very good from the factory lately, so that's good. That's just sort of another interesting topic, maybe to pause in the comments here, is just like how the various brands can manage their reputations. I think that without making too many promises, I think like something that this conversation is wanting me to do is do more outreach and connection to the various brands and give them the opportunity to come and connect with us piano technicians, because there's a lot of focus, I think, or at least maybe it's my fault for what I've been producing, but what I see other people producing is just generally like, how do you take care of pianos, right? Like, how do you tune a piano? How do you voice a piano? And even from voicing, you voice for the piano, but not, oh, well, how do you voice a Bosendorfer versus a New York Steinway or a Hamburg Steinway or whatever? Like, it's just like, yeah, listen to the piano, whatever it is. But I think that there could be a lot more relationships. I feel, especially I've seen there's a lot of tension in the relationships between piano dealers and piano technicians. And I think that could be improved, but I don't know if it's tension between manufacturers and technicians, but there's a little bit of a disconnection. I think a lot. There's not as much direct integration and opportunities to sort of talk through the processes. Any thoughts on that, Morgan? I think you deal with some of, you're dealing with some dealers directly selling pianos, correct?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I'm one that always likes to continue learning. And so like, if I can find an opportunity to get more training, I usually will take it. And it's interesting how hard it is, though, to get into some of these other dealerships. I know that Steinway offers training, but you have to be sponsored in most cases by either a Steinway school or a Steinway dealer, right? So there's kind of like you have to know someone to get in. And even then, there's still a wait list. Yamaha's kind of the same way in some regards. Yeah, I'm not quite sure what the disconnect is, why there isn't that much communication. I found that even finding like the parts numbers for some of these manufacturers can be kind of tricky. The first time that I had to call Yamaha to get a part, it was like a 45-minute experience where I had to go and be passed through and get validated and get this special code and call them back. And so, yeah, I think that could be something that could be improved for people in the future.
Yeah, definitely. And I'd like to play a role in this too. Again, bringing these brands to bring exposure. And if anybody has any input or ideas too, because it's kind of a, I wouldn't say delicate territory, but it's like it's an interesting territory to play around in, right? Because I think as technicians and industry professionals, we don't want a hard sell from a manufacturer. We don't want them coming in here and be like, we have, of course, the best pianos hands down, and they're comparing it with the leading piano and telling you under a rock and everywhere, and whose mother says that it's going to be better for whatever reason. And that's their job, right? To kind of be the cheerleader for their brand. But at the same time, to build the relationship, we technicians, we want a little bit more sort of clarity and transparency. I have had conversations with folks from Piano Brands where I think it actually really helps for them to admit to, maybe you only get to talk to like not the leadership of the company, but where they'll admit, yeah, this isn't so great with our pianos, but we're working on it. I think just even framing it that way, instead of just kind of like having this like, we're the best, there's nothing you can find wrong with it, we're going to handle every objection with something positive. Say, okay, yeah, that's one of the things. Here's where we excel, here's where we don't excel, and we're never going to try to, because this is our focus. And then here's where, yeah, we're not as great, but we do want to improve that, and we're working on it. Here's how. We want to hear your feedback, we want to cooperate. I think that's a nice attitude, but I think I'm interested to people's opinions too. And if we bring these manufacturers in and start introducing them to the audience and give them a platform to talk, what's the format? They just give a presentation of their brand. We don't care if they're selling it. Would we like them to teach us something? Would we like us to teach them things that we might be willing to pay for because we recognize that they're teaching us something that's of a higher quality? Do we want free training? And that builds a bond with that brand, that they gave us some free training on what they do. I'd love to answers for that, from that questions from the audience. Interesting stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. I know that I would want to just have like a basic overview of what's currently being offered, right? So we had Paul Ray on a couple of weeks ago or months ago now. So it'd be great for him to give us the full lineup right now of what's being offered, what makes them special, what makes them different, and then ways that we can contact Hai Lun,